Okay, so one of my other videos I just recorded here, I talked about how Louisa has a job at Walmart, and the amount of money she gets paid depends on how many hours she works. Okay? And there's a relationship there between the two variables. We talked about there are two variables. One of them was we called X, so that was the number of hours she worked. So maybe she worked 1 hour, maybe she worked 2 hours, maybe she worked 3 hours, maybe she worked 4 hours, maybe she worked X hours, right? And the amount of money she made we call Y, which was always 8 times the number of hours she worked. Okay. Well, notice this language we use. We said that her paycheck depends on how much she works. And now you would never say the opposite. You wouldn't say how many hours she worked depending on her paycheck, right? That doesn't make any sense. She works first, and then her paycheck comes because of how much she worked, right? It's not like her paycheck came first, and then that caused her to work a certain number of hours. So we call these in both math and also in science, you're going to use this too. We're going to call the X, that's called the independent variable, right? Independent variable. You know what? I'm running out of the room. I'm going to make this come down here so I have enough room to write the entire word independent. And Y is the dependent variable. Okay, so let's talk about this again. So Y, remember, how much you get paid depends on how many hours you work. Right? So Y depends. Y is the dependent variable. How much you get paid depends or is dependent upon how many hours you work. Now, how many hours you worked is independent. Um, that's the thing you have control of as a well, you can argue you don't have a lot of control of that as an employee, but you have more control over how many hours you work than you do of how much you're going to get paid, right? I can't go in and say, look, you got to pay me $300, or look, this month you got to pay me $1,000. I can't control that. Only that I can control is how much work I do. Okay, so oftentimes in science, especially in science, we don't use this term in math very much, but in science, the X is called the control. All right, if you have a control in science. And that's because in science we do experiments and we control things. I might be doing an experiment where I'm interested to see if I raise the temperature in my classroom, will that help my students perform better on their tests? I can't control how well you do in your tests, but I can control the temperature of my classroom. Right? So in that case, my temperature, and it's a variable because I can change the temperature of my classroom, that would be the X. That would be the independent. That would be my control variable. I control the temperature. And then we'll see if people's scores depend on the temperature, right? We'll see if your scores are affected by the temperature in the classroom. That's your outcome. So your Y is your outcome. Your Y is the thing you're interested in finding out about. In science, that's your hypothesis. That's your experimental question, right? That drives your experiment. Um, and this is the control. Okay. So in other words, other things, I'm just throwing out a whole bunch of words that we used. Independent, sometimes we call it a control. Dependent, sometimes we call it I guess your outcome. Again, we can think of that as in your job, I control how many hours I work. The outcome is my paycheck. We can call that, you can think of X, the independent, as being the cause, and the Y, the dependent, being the effect. So again, if you think about my paycheck, I work hours, which causes me to get paid. Right? Um, Usually the X happens first. If they don't happen at the same time, the X happens first because it's the cause. In my example with my temperature changing, right? I change the temperature, which causes students to perform better or worse. It's not the opposite way, right? It's not the students students start slacking off and the room starts getting colder, right? It's the other way around. I cause the temperature to change, and that causes the effect is the students' grades change, or their performance, or whatever. Kind of a dumb example, but there it is. Okay, so those are two terms you should understand: independent and dependent. Okay, Y is always the dependent, X is always the independent. And also another little tidbit I throw in there is if you're dealing with time, if time is one of your variables, okay, remember time changes. If time is one of your variables, that is, I'm going to say almost, but every time I've ever seen that, it's always your independent variable. It's your independent variable. And if you think about it, that's because nothing causes time to happen. Time just happens, right? I can't cause time to stop. I can't cause time to go faster. I can't cause time to go slower. Time just happens. It doesn't depend on anything. But time does cause a lot of other things to happen. Right? Time causes, well, I don't even want to get into this. Time causes lots of things to happen, right? Lots of things happen because they get older. People get sick because they get older. People get smarter because they get older. People get taller because they get older. Um, you know, a ball drops because time's passing by, right? It falls down because time keeps going on. So time causes a lot of things to happen. So it's the X, it's the control. Right. So that's the video for independent versus dependent variables. And hopefully that kind of clears things up. Next video, I will get into, we'll give another problem where I give you why. That's also another reason why, before I get into the other video, let me erase some of this. That's why we usually have equations. You'll usually see them, and not so much in 6th grade, but especially when you get to 8th grade, you'll see those a lot. You'll see equations where it says y equals something something x plus something something, all right? It usually starts with y equals. And that's because usually y is the thing you want to know most about, right? I want to know how much I get paid. I want to know my student scores. I want to know the thing I'm measuring, right? So that's why it's usually out front all by itself. And usually have a whole bunch of stuff back here like that, right? This side's more complicated than this side. And that's because y is your independence, the thing you're interested in finding out. You want to get it all by itself so you can know what it is. Okay? So that's going to take us into the next video a little bit where I'm going to set up some equations based on Louise's problem here and actually start solving for some. If I give you one value, you can tell me the other one. If I give you y, you can tell me x. If I give you x, you can tell me